The Bristol Jock. When Uncle Cliff was drafted into the army in the 1939-45 conflict, he was quite a lot older at 31 than most of his fellow squaddies. So he was given the sobriquet of Junior. Not that this ironic title would have upset him, for Cliff had a great deal of confidence and a great fund of humour. In Civvy Street, he was a grocer and managed a store owned by the Maypole, a well-known chain of grocery stores. He was able to afford a motorcycle, and this was his passport to an exciting career that was to propel him into 3 separate theatres of war. On demobilisation, Cliff returned to the Maypole and was one of those uncles who suddenly appeared in my life. It was to be some time before I realised just what this friendly, genial man had experienced. Because he could ride a motorcycle, Cliff was drafted into the Royal Corps of Signals as a dispatch rider, and after training he was attached to the 51st Highland Division, which was made up of mainly Scottish regiments, such as the Black Watch, which recruited from the Glasgow area. The division was serviced by several corps, and the Signals would have been part of the support group. To give the division an identity, all would wear the Balmoral, a flat bonnet with a red pom-pom on the top of it. Cliff was now an honorary Scot, even though he had a pronounced South Bristol accent. Within a short time, he was on a troop ship to the Mediterranean and the North African campaign. It is difficult to imagine a bigger change in environment than going from the clean and tidy shop that Cliff had left behind to what was before him in North Africa. His letters home to his eldest sister related a world of sand and flies, heat and dirt. His role was to take dispatches between the various units that made up the division on his matchless motorcycle during the build-up to the battle we now know as El Alamein. Very few of his reminiscences in later life were of the action that he was undoubtedly involved in. What we got was the dark humour that comes from dire situations and only just surviving. In the desert campaign, Cliff's motorcycle was exchanged for an American Jeep, and on a forward reconnaissance mission with his signals captain, they drove to the top of a small barren hill in the sand to get a better view of the forward German positions. A black speck in the sky was coming towards them. Spitfire? No. Hurricane? No. Heinkel? Yes, and one that started spraying bullets at them with intent to cause serious damage. As one, they both dived under the Jeep as the Heinkel made several passes overhead, kicking up the sand around them before either lack of ammunition or fuel made it fly off. Emerging from under the Jeep, Cliff realised that in his flight to safety, he'd been under the petrol tank. The captain had sustained a wound. He was portly, and in his dive for cover he had scraped his backside on the sharp edge of the Jeep's step. Cliff was later to read that the captain was mentioned in dispatches as wounded in action. Having survived the Battle of Alamein, Cliff moved with the 51st Division to the invasion of Sicily. Later he would recount some of the alarms and diversions of that campaign to us in his back garden, among his pigeons and rabbits. In this more peaceful environment, Cliff had become a keen pigeon and rabbit fancier, winning several prizes with his chinchillas and well respected among the fur and feather fraternity. The advance through Italy against the German army was slow and dogged. Forward progress ground to a halt at Monte Cassino, where the Germans had fortified an old monastery and effectively blocked off any further advance, and causing many casualties among the Allies. Cliff was for days and nights on the road between units, often under shell and small arms fire, with virtually no sleep and even less food. On one mission to a forward unit, Cliff had his Jeep commandeered by a British officer, as his unit was in deep trouble with seriously injured soldiers. Cliff was left with no means of forwarding his dispatch, but on foot. Sheltering in a ditch beside an exhausted Cockney infantryman, Cliff confided his problem. "Let's look at the bugger," said the squaddy, meaning the dispatch. So against all army protocol, they opened it with some trepidation on Cliff's part, only to find that his marathon journey was in order to congratulate an officer on his promotion. The dispatch was used to help light a fag, and Cliff started his long slog back to base. Monte Cassino was eventually overcome at great cost. Resistance in Italy crumbled, and the 51st Division was reassigned to the invasion of France. Cliff must have thought that he had earned some leave, but the only respite he got was hospitalization for the malaria that he had contracted in Italy. Cliff was soon back in the old routine and following the German retreat across the Rhine and into Germany. He recalled passing hundreds of German soldiers, making their way along the roads to makeshift prison of war camps. One particular German soldier looked so exhausted that Cliff lifted him into his jeep. Not a wise move. Having not eaten for some considerable time, Cliff saw a British field kitchen and pulled in. By this time, soldiers on both sides were ragged and dishevelled and almost indistinguishable from each other. Cliff got the POW to put on his own battle dress top and indicated to his new German pal not to say a word. At the canteen, an Army Catering Corps corporal said, "What would you like, Jock?" Stung, Cliff replied, "We're no jocks. I'm from Bristol." "And he's a Kraut,"